You hear it before you see it. The faint rattle of tiny copper bells, cutting through the echo of a cold stone corridor. The sound is playful but wrong. It doesn't belong in this place of hushed whispers and sharpened daggers. The court waits in silence. And then he appears. The jester. Painted smile, motley colors, bells jingling with every step. A figure meant to make kings laugh, yet one who knows secrets that could topple thrones. Before we go deeper into this hidden history, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, so you never miss the stories that history tried to bury. The jester was never just a clown. He was often the only man in the room allowed to speak the truth, even when truth was a weapon sharper than any sword. Imagine yourself in that world, a young servant, forced into the machinery of court life. You watch the painted fool move freely, mocking princes and queens, daring to call the king himself a fool. And the king laughs. But you notice how the courtier's laughter doesn't come from joy. It trembles with fear, because every joke hides a blade. Every punchline is a truth that no noble dares to speak aloud. That was the strange power of the jester. A powerless figure who sometimes commanded more influence than generals or priests. He could ease a king's rage in ways no advisor could. He could twist politics with a single barbed jest. And he could destroy himself with one word too many. Take Triboulet, the infamous jester of Francis I of France. He mocked courtiers so mercilessly that enemies plotted to kill him more than once. Yet Francis protected him, because only Triboulet could make the king laugh when the weight of ruling grew unbearable. But how long could a fool survive when every joke flirted with treason? In London, whispers tell of jesters who weren't so fortunate. Dragged to the tower, silenced forever, their bones later found with bells still fastened to their caps. And still rulers kept them close, because power is a lonely prison. A king sits on a throne of daggers, surrounded by false smiles and hidden ambitions. The jester was different. He owned no land. He had no bloodline, no claim to succession. He was an outsider. That made him safe, until he wasn't. Perhaps that was his true role, not just to amuse, but to be the pressure valve in a court that could explode with tension at any moment. He could say the unsayable, and by doing so, he carried the burden of truth no one else dared to voice. But the bells on his cap rang a warning with every step. One wrong word, and his fate was sealed. The year is 1526. A feast burns brightly in the halls of Fontainebleau. Torches flicker, wine spills, and music clashes with laughter. But in the shadows of the golden chamber, eyes do not rest on the king. They rest on the fool who dares to mock him. You see him, Triboulet, hunched yet nimble, his face painted in twisted cheer. He jangles his bells as he insults the most powerful men of France. Nobles stiffen, their hands gripping the daggers at their belts, but Francis I roars with laughter. For a moment, the court breathes again. The king's favor is survival itself. Yet the nobles do not forgive. And you, standing at the edge of the hall, sense it. The simmering hatred directed not at the king, but at the fool who exposes their vanity. Tonight, a jest cuts too deep. Triboulet mimics a duke's limp, then stumbles into the queen's path with a bawdy remark. The crowd gasps. Every soul waits for Francis's rage. But the king only grins, claps his fool on the back, and calls for more wine. Triboulet lives another night. But how many more can he survive when enemies sharpen their knives in silence? That was the paradox of the jester. He lived only as long as his master's laughter endured. And laughter, like power, is fickle. In England, fools learned the same cruel lesson. Will Somers, beloved jester of Henry VIII, once mocked the king's obsession with his failing marriages. At first, Henry chuckled, savoring the rare taste of honesty. But courtiers whispered that even Somers was skating on ice, so thin it could shatter at any moment. For what greater risk could there be than jesting about a king's wounded pride? The jester's freedom was a mask. He could speak, yes, but every word was a wager. Speak the truth too boldly, and he would be branded insolent. Hide it too softly, and he would be forgotten, discarded like an old toy. And so he lived on a knife's edge, dancing between death and survival. But why did kings cling to them? Because the throne is the loneliest seat in the world. Power isolates, turning friends into rivals, family into threats. A king cannot trust his counselors, for they hunger for his throne. He cannot trust his generals, for they hunger for his victories. Even the queen may weave her own ambitions into her husband's bed. But the jester, he has nothing. No claim, no army, no inheritance. His only weapon is laughter. His only loyalty is survival. So the fool becomes both shield and mirror. He can ease a tyrant's rage with a single antic. He He can speak aloud the forbidden truths everyone else swallows. And in that moment, he becomes the most dangerous man alive, because he is both indispensable and disposable. You imagine what it must have felt like to wear the mask of joy while knowing that one slip, one unlucky jest, could mean chains, torture, or the gallows. The sound of your own bells would mock you as you stumbled toward death. And still you perform, because the alternative is silence. And silence, in a royal court, is worse than death. Triboulet knew this better than most. They say he once angered a nobleman so deeply that he faced execution. Terrified, he begged the king for mercy. Francis, amused, granted him a twisted reprieve. The fool could choose his own method of death. Triboulet, trembling yet quick-witted, replied, "Sire, if I must die, then let it be of old age." The court erupted in laughter, and his life was spared this time. But even the cleverest fool cannot cheat fate forever. Each jest was a gamble against eternity, and one day, the dice would fall against him. They drag you through a door you've never noticed before, a narrow oak panel behind the tapestry of hunting stags. The music from the great hall shrinks to a muffled heartbeat. You still smell roasted meat, sweet pears, crushed grapes on the floor. But down here the air curdles. Cold iron, wet stone, secrets. And hey, if this kind of hidden history grips you, remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next descent beneath the throne. They push you into a room lit by a single candle jammed into a crack in the wall. The flame stutters. A rat watches from the drain. You refuse to cry because your bells would give you away, the nervous tremor, the clatter of fear. So you fix your painted smile with 2 trembling fingers and tell the guard something clever. He doesn't laugh. He's not paid to. You know the rule of the court. The jester's freedom ends where a noble's vanity begins. And tonight, you're just stepped over the line. A harmless mimicry, you thought, an imitation of the chancellor's slick way of stroking his beard while lying through his teeth. The room had loved it. Even the queen let slip a breath through her nose. But the chancellor's eyes went small and flat, like a blade laid on a table. It wasn't your best joke. It may be your last. They leave you in the dark. Time softens at the edges. It could be hours or a night or a day that won't die. When the door finally opens, he stands there, your king. Not in robes. Not with his crown. Just a man, heavier than last year, older than he admits. He smells of cinnamon and smoke and sleeplessness. "Can I not be told the truth," he says, "except by a man who hides his face to say it?" You bow so low your bells kiss the floor. You want to tell him, "Sire, I hide my face so you don't have to. I take the lashes so you can pretend the whip doesn't exist." But you say something lighter, something like the king expects from his fool. You balance a coin on your nose. You almost drop it. "Rise," he commands, "and walk with me." You walk. The guards keep their distance. The corridor tightens, then widens into a gallery of faded tapestries. Hunting scenes, saints, an old king with a hawk, and a boy who looks like you. Your king touches a frayed thread at the hem of the fabric, then lets it go. "Do you know why I keep you?" he asks. "To divert a storm. To save a soul. To lighten a burden. To be a blade wrapped in ribbon." You say none of it. "To laugh, your majesty." He nods. "And to make me remember what I'd rather forget." He stops at a window that looks down on the moat. The water is black and full of stars. Somewhere a sentry coughs. "There are men," the king says softly, "who think you should not see another sunrise." The words are gentle. The sentence is not. Your body goes cold and hot and cold again. He continues, "But there are other men who would not have me lose you, for they believe losing you would be losing the last mirror that does not lie." The king turns. He is closer than you realized. His eyes, sea gray in the half-dark, bear that familiar pleading, the look of a soul trapped up a tree it climbed itself. You recognize it. You wear a version of it every day. "Can you live," he asks, "without tearing open the skin of those who cannot bear the air? Can you live without the one thing that keeps you alive? The power to puncture the room so it can breathe? The license to say the thing that, if unsaid, will rot the kingdom like a wound wrapped in silk?" You answer carefully, "I can live with softer needles, sire." He studies you as if you were a weapon he commissioned and now regrets. Then he says, "Softness is not your gift." He nods to the guards. Return him to his chamber. He leaves you with a promise unspoken. Mercy if you can stop being yourself. The court smells different the next morning. Antlers and incense sweat beneath perfume. The chancellor preens like a man who has won, but must pretend he hasn't. He avoids your eye. You perform for the feast, but you keep your jests blunt and round, nothing with edges. People smile, then forget what they were smiling about, the way they do after a sermon that doesn't scorch. Your throat goes dry. Your tongue feels thick. The crowd's attention slides off you like oil off metal. You see it then, the cruel arithmetic of survival. Too sharp, you die. Too dull, you disappear. The only way forward is in between, and there is no such path. The jester's dance is a bridge of cobweb, and the kingdom's weight must cross. That night you dream you're back in the gallery. The tapestries ripple. The hawk lifts off the old king's arm and lands on your shoulder. You wake with the taste of iron in your mouth. Word travels. In Scotland, a fool named Archie keeps his head by setting it at the king's feet, then snatching it back at the last second while everyone laughs too loudly. In Italy, a dwarf performer spends a year pretending to be deaf, so he can overhear what men will say when they think he can't listen. One evening, his feigned deafness is cured by a miracle he has arranged, and he repeats what he's heard in a blaze of revelations that reshuffles the court like cards. In England, a gentle fool entertains a tyrant who changes wives as if grief were a costume. The fool survives by making the king laugh at time itself. Yet even he walks an imaginary line no one else can see. Every joke is a step over an abyss. Death, for your kind, rarely announces itself. It arrives as a favor not granted, an ally who looks away, a door that doesn't open from the inside. The Chancellor's revenge is quieter than you feared. He does not put you to the question. He does not shout. He sharpens a different knife, rumor. Suddenly, your friendly jabs smell like treason. Your devoted listeners remember your words with the wrong tone. A careless servant repeats a scene in the scullery, not quite the way it happened, and now it happened that way forever. Your bellhood becomes a flag your enemies claim as their own. Still, the king keeps you, if only by force of habit, if only because your absence would announce his weakness to wolves. You stay. You work. You swallow your sharper lines. You make faces when you want to make war. And at night, alone, you practice the jests you will never tell, your body carving the air with movements no one will see. But there are nights when the old gift breaks free, when silence is a sin. On one such night, the hall glitters like a forged dawn. The Chancellor, flushed with wine and victory, lifts a golden cup and proposes a toast to the stable hand who found his manners. The room ripples with laughter. Your jaw tightens. You bow low, lower, lowest, as if searching for something on the floor. Forgive an animal, you say, for remembering the smell of the stable when the horses are brought to the table. For an instant, the court hangs between breath and blood. You've done it again, spilled what everyone knows onto the table, where no one will admit to eating. The Chancellor blinks. The Queen's fan pauses. The King does nothing at all. And then, contrary to your fears, he laughs. It is not a generous laugh. It is a laugh like a knife unsheathed. The room follows him. The Chancellor smiles without teeth. You survive the night. You will pay for it later. You try to leave the hall while the laughter still covers you, but a hand grips your arm. A lady in waiting, silver-eyed and too young for her knowledge. She whispers, he signed something. Tomorrow. Be elsewhere. You don't ask who he is. There's only ever one he. You nod as if she's handed you an apple. She floats away on silk. You swallow the pit. You run through your options. Disappear to the kitchens and stay, a ghost among flour sacks, until the ink dries on someone else's doom. Hide in the chapel until sunrise, pretending piety. Or leave, through the postern gate beneath the mason's scaffolds, where the stones are always wet and no one watches. But leaving is its own sentence. The king gave you a kind of life, and the kingdom gave you a kind of cage. To flee now is to declare yourself the thing the Chancellor says you are. To stay is to submit your neck to a law you don't respect. You go to the chapel. Not to pray, though you do in a way, but to rehearse. You move in the candlelight like a man carving himself out of stone. You whisper your lines to the saints who, if they exist, have more pity than power. You practice not the jests you'll tell, but the ones you'll swallow, the hardest performance of all. Dawn comes gray and damp. The postern gate weeps. You walk the courtyard with a loaf of bread and a stolen apple tucked in your sleeve. The world is quieter than it should be. No merchants. No dogs. A sparrow scolds you from the eaves, then flies away. The guards find you near the storeroom. They don't grip you hard. They don't speak. They escort you back to the door behind the tapestry, the one you couldn't forget if you wanted to. Your throat goes dry again. Your tongue turns to wood. Your bells, traitors that they are, chime the rhythm of a prayer you never learned. Inside, a small table holds an inkwell, a scroll, 2 seals. The Chancellor stands with 3 witnesses, whose faces have already become part of the furniture of your dread. The king is not here. You realize, with a slow horror that feels like falling, that he has chosen not to see this. By the laws of this realm, the Chancellor begins, hands folded, voice silk. We censure your insolence and banish you from the king's presence, the court's protection, and the precincts of this palace for a period not less than. You stop listening. The first sentence is the only one that matters, banishment. Worse than death, because it takes the one thing you were made for and strips it clean. You're not only being cut off from a man, you're being cut off from your purpose. The Chancellor offers the scroll for your mark, watching with the tight mouth of a man tasting victory he did not cook. You sign with a little drawing of bells. It is obscene and beautiful. One of the witnesses snorts, then hides it, then becomes frightened that he has laughed. Your belongings, the Chancellor says, again by the laws. My belongings are a hat and a stick, you reply. Our forfeit? You nod. Then I will keep the part of me that is not a thing. He doesn't understand. Or pretends not to. It doesn't matter. They take you by the east gate, so your disgrace won't drip onto the carpets. The yard stares without staring. A kitchen boy you taught to juggle cries once, silently like a hiccup. The lady-in-waiting who warned you doesn't appear. You're almost glad. Her kindness hurts worse than their cruelty. The gate opens. The road yawns. Mist eats the hedgerows. You step out, and your bells sound startlingly loud in the morning noise of birds and carts, and the world that does not care who ruled last night. For a few stunned breaths, the air feels like freedom. Then it tastes like loss. You walk. The castle shrinks. The stones of the road find your feet, and study them with steady malice. You try to take off the hat, and cannot. Your hands lower themselves. The bells refuse to stop. The mask, not the paint, not the smile, but the thing that grew underneath both, will not come off. There is a town up ahead where men will pay for jokes that don't hurt. There is a churchyard where men will ask you to dance at weddings you wish you believed in. There is a square where a man in a motley suit will juggle knives, and one of them will fall point first and make a sound like the end of something that once mattered. You think of the king looking out over the moat at night, of the Chancellor practicing his victory walk, of the lady-in-waiting peeling a silver ring off her finger because it reminds her of you. You think of the gallery with the hawk that flew from the tapestry. You think of all the truths you told and the ones you didn't, and how both kinds punish you, just in different rooms. A wagon passes, and the driver lifts 2 fingers without looking at you. You lift none in return. The wind picks up. Your bells speak to it. The sound is almost laughter. The road swallows you. Dust clings to your shoes, and your bells grow quieter with every mile. Yet you are not alone, not truly. Across kingdoms, others like you wear the same painted grin, the same curse of being allowed to speak while everyone else holds their tongue. You feel them, though you've never met. Their stories drift on the wind like half-remembered songs. In Scotland, Archibald Armstrong, Archie to his king, once mocked the wrong nobleman. His tongue, sharp as a blade, had carried him through years of peril, but in 1637 his luck broke. A single jest, too bitter, too public, sealed his fate. The order came swiftly, banishment. Archie left court in disgrace, stripped of favor, his motley costume suddenly worthless rags. The people who once howled at his wit now turned away, as if laughter itself had betrayed them. In England, the gentle Will Sommers outlasted Henry VIII himself. He was spared the gallows not by mercy, but by craft. Sommers softened his humor, choosing warmth over cruelty, reminding the king of his own humanity when rage and suspicion consumed him. He lived, yes, but survival required a slow erasure of his edge. The sword of truth dulled into a butter knife. And though he escaped execution, he died half forgotten, his brilliance smothered by the very restraint that saved him. In Italy, they whisper of dwarfs and cripples who entertained the Medicis, grotesque bodies made into living punchlines. Some played their roles willingly, wielding deformity as power. Others were broken into it, their suffering wrapped in ribbons for the court's amusement. When one of them dared mock a duke too boldly, he was thrown into the river at night. The official records call it an accident. The truth is never written, but everyone knows. You hear these stories because they are your own. Different names, same ending. The fool's life is a gamble where the house always wins. Still, kings cling to fools. Why? Because absolute power breeds absolute fear. And fear is a poison without antidote. The jester becomes the last vessel for truth, the final confessor in a world where priests flatter and generals lie. When laughter echoes, it buys the monarch a moment's peace, a fragile reprieve from the ghosts that stalk him. But every reprieve demands a sacrifice. And the sacrifice is you. You wonder if this is fate. Perhaps history itself requires the fool. Not to entertain, but to remind the powerful of their own fragility. You are the knife disguised as laughter, the whisper in the tyrant's ear that he too will die. And tyrants do not forgive reminders of their mortality. One tale, seldom told, speaks of a jester in Bohemia who performed for a duke obsessed with omens. The fool dared to predict the duke's downfall, cloaking prophecy in riddles and rhyme. When famine struck, the duke's mind twisted with paranoia. He declared the jester a witch, a sorcerer of evil fortune. They hanged him at dawn while the court watched in silence. The bells on his cap rang one last time in the wind, a death knell dressed as comedy. The pattern repeats. Again and again, across centuries. Some fools die with a jest on their lips. Some die in silence, broken by years of smiling when they wanted to scream. Some live long enough to be forgotten, which might be the cruelest fate of all. And as you walk that lonely road away from your king, you realize, you are not a man. You are a role, an archetype, a shadow carried forward through time. Your name will blur, your jokes will vanish, but your fate will echo in every court, every palace, every gilded cage where power festers. Because the fool is eternal. And so is his tragedy. The gallows never care who climbs them. Nobleman or beggar, thief or traitor, wood and rope ask no questions. But when a jester mounts those steps, the world shifts. The crowd doesn't know whether to laugh or cry. Imagine it, a cold square, the winter air sharp as glass. A fool, cap jingling, is dragged forward by guards who grip him like a criminal, though yesterday they laughed at his jokes. His crime? Words. Not swords, not blood, not treason in the usual sense, but words wrapped in laughter that cut too deep. The record books whisper of such deaths. In Poland, a court fool who mocked the king's mistress was beaten until the bells of his hood clattered loose. In Spain, a dwarf fool was accused of blasphemy for parodying a priest. He was whipped in the courtyard, his motley torn from him piece by piece until he stood naked, no longer a fool, just a man stripped of his mask. In England, tales speak of fools who vanished into the tower. The walls still remember their screams. A jest about taxation? Treason. A slip of the tongue about a marriage? Sedition. Once inside, they were not clowns, but prisoners. And in the damp cells beneath the Thames, laughter froze in their throats. You can almost see it. A fool shackled, bells muted by rust, still trying to make the jailer smile. Still trying to survive the only way he knows, through jest. But the jailer does not laugh. He does not need to. The fool is already defeated, because what is a jester without an audience? And yet, some fools died defiantly. One chronicler claims a French jester, condemned for mocking a nobleman, turned his execution into a performance. As the noose slipped around his neck, he cracked a final joke. At last, my audience will be above me. They say the crowd laughed and wept all at once, and when the trapdoor opened, the bells rang one last tragic applause. But most did not go so grandly. Most slipped into oblivion, erased by silence. A jester's greatest weapon was his voice, and silence was the cruelest punishment of all. The psychological torment was worse than the physical. To spend years laughing while dying inside. To perform comedy when your heart longed for truth. To know that the very gift that kept you alive was also the curse that would kill you. Picture the scene. A jester, old now, long past the days of daring wordplay. His jokes are gentle, almost childish. Nobles roll their eyes. Children laugh, but the laughter has no power, no edge. He sees it in their faces. He is safe now only because he is harmless. The man who once made kings tremble with a single jest has become a toy. And perhaps that is worse than death. You walk further into this history, and the echoes grow louder. Bells toll in your mind, not from churches, but from caps torn off dying men. You realize what the chronicles do not say outright. The fool was not merely a servant of laughter. He was a scapegoat. His role was to bleed so the court could breathe. His punishment was inevitable. His end, unavoidable. The bells go silent. But their silence screams louder than any joke. You sit by the fire in a tavern, hood pulled low, your bells tied down so no one hears them. Outside, snow drifts against the wooden shutters. Inside, voices rise and fall, merchants, soldiers, washerwomen. They speak of harvests, wars, and taxes, but they do not notice you. You are invisible without your mask. And for once, you are glad. The tavern is loud with laughter. Not courtly laughter, polished and false, but the rough, honest sound of peasants drinking ale. You study their faces, and it dawns on you. The difference between their laughter and the king's is the difference between life and death. Here, laughter heals. In court, it condemns. And yet, both need it. A king surrounded by flatterers begins to choke on their silence. No one dares tell him the truth. No one dares laugh at his mistakes. But the fool can. The fool must. Without him, the court would suffocate. The fool is not just entertainment. He is medicine. Bitter medicine, yes, but without it, the body politic sickens and dies. History is littered with proof. Chroniclers write that when King Philip of Spain slipped into madness, only his jester could calm him. When the Tsars of Russia grew drunk on power, fools were the ones who whispered reminders of humility, sometimes with riddles, sometimes with biting mockery. In Tudor England, jesters acted as informal spies, slipping between servants and lords, carrying whispers back to the throne. They were comedians, counselors, and confessors all at once. Imagine the scene. A fool crouches at the king's feet, juggling apples. The nobles sneer, until one apple drops and splits open. Inside, a worm writhes. The fool lifts it high, crying, "Behold the kingdom's feast." The hall erupts, half in laughter, half in fear. The joke is clear, wealth rots from within. No courtier would dare say such words. But because the fool said it with a grin, he lives. For now, their wisdom was hidden in absurdity. Truth wrapped in nonsense. A dagger concealed in a toy. That is why philosophers sometimes envied the fool. Erasmus of Rotterdam wrote the praise of folly, celebrating the idea that only through foolishness could one glimpse divine truth. Shakespeare filled his plays with fools who outwitted kings and lords, speaking the raw honesty no other character dared. The fool was not only a figure of laughter, he was a channel for something deeper, older, almost sacred. But society demanded its price. The fool's wisdom could never stand naked. It had to be dressed in motley, jingling bells, pratfalls, and mockery. Strip away the comedy, and his words were dangerous, even fatal. To survive, he must always disguise his truth. A wise man could be burned for heresy. A fool could speak the same idea and live, because everyone could pretend it was just a joke. And yet, this disguise was also a prison. Imagine carrying visions, insights, prophecies even, and knowing you can only voice them with a painted grin. To reveal your seriousness would be to invite the axe. To keep silent would be to betray your gift. This was the jester's torment. To hold wisdom but never own it, to speak truth yet never be believed. The peasants in the tavern laugh again, and you almost join them. But the sound catches in your throat. You remember a night in the hall, the king staring into the fire, whispering that he feared death more than any war. You had told him death was like sleep, but without the chance to wake up. He had laughed so hard he wept. The nobles had thought it was a jest. But you knew, it was the truest thing you'd ever said. You sip ale, bitter and warm, and think, perhaps the fool's curse is also his gift. To be heard without being believed. To guide without being thanked. To carry the burden of truth while wearing the mask of madness. And still, history needs him. Kings will always rise. Courts will always rot. Power will always breed silence. And somewhere in every age, a fool will jingle his bells, grin his painted grin, and cut through the silence with laughter sharp enough to bleed. The tavern door slams open. A rider, soaked in snow, stumbles in. His voice cracks as he calls out, "The old king is dead." The hall goes silent. For a moment, no one moves. Then the peasants murmur, some in grief, others in relief. You sit frozen, ale spilling from your hand. The man you mocked, served, and saved is gone. And with him, perhaps, the last thread tying your mask to the world. What is a jester without a king? Once, every king had a fool. Every court rang with bells and painted faces. But slowly, almost without anyone noticing, they began to vanish. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the figure of the court jester was fading into memory. Why? The world itself was changing. Kings grew stronger, their courts larger and more serious. Politics became less about feasts and tournaments, and more about paperwork, treaties, and councils. The age of knights and just gave way to the age of ministers, accountants, and generals. In such a world, a fool with a painted grin looked out of place. Another reason, theater. As public stages rose in London, Paris, Venice, and Madrid, professional actors and comedians took over the role of making people laugh. What once happened only in the king's hall could now be enjoyed by everyone in the marketplace or theater house. The laughter that had been exclusive to nobles was now shared by all. Audiences no longer needed the jester, They had Shakespeare's fools, Italian commedia dell'arte clowns, and traveling troupes that made humor into an art form. At court, meanwhile, rulers grew less tolerant of mockery. Absolutist kings, like Louis XIV of France, demanded control over everything, even laughter. A jester's dangerous truths no longer fit in a world where monarchs called themselves the very sun. And so the jester's role was replaced by poets, musicians, and playwrights, who entertained but never mocked. It was not a clean ending, though. In some smaller courts, fools lingered on, their bells jingling weakly into the 18th century. But they were no longer sharp-tongued truth-tellers. They became gentle companions, performers for children, harmless reminders of an older time. Their edge was gone, their wisdom smothered. They were kept like pets, curiosities in motley suits. Imagine one of these last fools. Old, bent, dressed in bright colors that no longer shine. He plays his lute softly in a corner of a grand hall, while powdered wigs and silk gowns whirl in a dance. No one listens to his jokes anymore. The courtiers prefer polished plays, refined operas, or witty salon talk. His bells sound faint, like echoes from another world. He smiles, but the smile no longer has power. Sometimes he is invited only to amuse children, like a living toy. The same man who once dared to mock a king now juggles for a child who barely looks up from her sugared almonds. When she tires of him, he is dismissed with a wave of a tiny hand. This was how the line of jesters ended, not with fire, not with gallows, but with indifference. And perhaps that is the cruelest death of all. Yet their spirit survived. You can see it in the stage clown, in satire, in comedians who still risk their careers, or their lives, by speaking uncomfortable truths. The mask of the fool never truly disappears. It changes shape, moves to new arenas, but its soul is the same. Laughter as weapon, comedy as mirror, truth hidden inside a jest. But for those last men in motley, it must have felt like betrayal. They were born to walk a dangerous line between death and survival, to speak truths no one else dared. And now the world no longer needed them. The bells that once announced both danger and joy grew silent, packed away in chests or hung as relics on the walls of castles. A traveler might find one even today, an old cap, dusty and moth-eaten, bells still attached. Pick it up, and you might feel the weight of all those lives. Men who laughed while trembling, who told truths disguised as jokes, who died forgotten or mocked, yet carried a wisdom no one else could risk. The fool's role has ended, but his ghost lingers. Every time a joke cuts too close, every time laughter reveals a truth no one wanted to hear, the spirit of the jester speaks again. And if you listen closely, sometimes in silence, you can almost hear it still, the faint rattle of bells, echoing down a corridor of stone, reminding us that laughter has always been a dangerous thing. They find it decades later. A wooden chest, buried in the dust of a forgotten castle attic. Inside, scraps of bright cloth, stiff with age. A cap, its colors faded to gray, its bells corroded but still clinging stubbornly to the seams. When the chest is opened, the bells give a faint rattle, as if the air itself remembers. And in that sound, you hear not just one life, but hundreds. The lives of fools who danced, laughed, mocked, and paid the price. The ghosts of men who lived on the knife's edge between comedy and death. Before we close this final chapter, subscribe to the channel, so you'll never miss the stories that history tried to erase. You imagine the last of them. He is not young anymore. His hair, once hidden beneath motley, is streaked with gray. His shoulders stoop. His jokes, once dangerous, now land softly, safe for children and weary nobles. He sits by the fire at night, the halls around him echoing with music and chatter that no longer includes him. Once, the court had gasped at his words, terrified and thrilled that someone dared mock the untouchable. Now they barely notice. He is background, furniture, a relic that has outlived its use. He remembers the days when laughter could kill, when each jest was a duel with fate. His survival had been victory, but now survival feels like exile. To live long enough to become irrelevant, that is the fool's final punishment. The courtiers turn to theater, to poets, to actors who wear masks without danger. The fool's mask no longer fits the age, and so he fades. Not executed, not exiled, simply ignored. And indifference, he learns, is colder than the axe. One night, he wanders the empty gallery. Moonlight spills across the tapestries, the same that once seemed to breathe and shift with hidden omens. He stops before the figure of a king embroidered in thread of gold. Once, he had mocked a king to his face. Now he mocks no one. He raises his bells, shakes them once. The sound is thin, fragile. It echoes through the stone hall, and for a heartbeat, he feels alive again. But no one comes. No one listens. The next morning, he is gone. Some say he left quietly, walking into the forests where no court could follow. Others whisper he threw himself into the moat, letting the water carry his bells into silence. A servant claims he died in his sleep, his cap folded neatly on the table, as if he knew it was the end. No one records the truth. No one bothers. The chronicles are silent. The last fool dies not with a roar, not with a laugh, but with a sigh. Yet his shadow lingers. Because what was the jester truly? Not a clown, not a toy, but the last mirror of power. He was the one who could remind kings that they were mortal, that their crowns sat crooked, that their thrones were built on fear. His weapon was laughter, but his message was death. You too will fall. And perhaps that is why history erased him. Power does not want its weakness remembered. But if you listen late at night, when the corridors of an old castle creak, or when a joke slices deeper than it should, you might still hear it. The faint rattle of bells. The sound of truth disguised as folly. The echo of men who lived by making others laugh, and who died because they could not stop. The jester's fate was always the same. Helplessness before forces larger than himself. Bound by the rules of kings and courts, trapped in a mask he could never remove, he was doomed not because of what he did, but because of what he represented. And that is the tragedy. He carried wisdom in laughter, courage in mockery, humanity in madness. He was the one who could speak when no one else dared. And for that, he was always condemned. The chest closes. The bells fall silent. The dust settles. History moves on. But somewhere, in that silence, the fool is still laughing. Not to amuse, not to mock, but to remind. Because the truth, once spoken, is never truly forgotten.